In Laboratory Reddit, today's story is...
My sister-in-law refused to help me when we almost died in an accident. Now 8 months later, she shows up with her boyfriend demanding to see my children. I still feel like I'm trapped in a nightmare that won't let go of me. 8 months ago, my life changed completely. My husband and I were returning from a special outing, something unusual with 2 young children, when a drunk driver ignored a red light and crashed into our vehicle. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital, confused and in pain, surrounded by machines and nurses rushing around. My first concern was not for myself, but for my children. I needed to know where they were and if they were okay. Our neighbor, Mrs. Donahue, was looking after them that night. She had kindly offered to help us so that we could enjoy our evening. She was a real lifesaver at that time because neither of us could leave the hospital. However, Mrs. Donahue was elderly and had her own limitations. When the doctors informed me that I would be in bed for weeks and that my husband would need at least 4 months before he could walk without crutches, I panicked completely. Who could look after our little ones in the long term? My parents lived in another state and could not travel due to health problems, and their parents, although affectionate, were not in a position to look after a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. That's when I thought of Trina, my husband's sister. She lived nearby and had always been very clear about her decision not to have children, but this was completely different. I wasn't asking her to look after the children while we went out and had fun. It was a genuine emergency. My husband hesitated, commenting that Trina wasn't exactly maternal, but I didn't have the energy to argue. We were desperate, and family is supposed to be there to support you at times like this, isn't it? We called Trina and explained our situation. Her response hit me like a slap in the face. She said she couldn't disrupt her routine or compromise her personal boundaries for our accident. She had chosen a childless lifestyle and couldn't be expected to step in just because we were in a bind. Her tone was casual, almost indifferent, as if we were asking her for a small favor rather than help in a serious crisis. I was completely stunned. My husband tried to reason with her, explaining that we weren't asking for a permanent arrangement, just assistance until we could recover. But she remained adamant, insisting that it was not her responsibility to alter her life for us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't as if Trina had an extremely demanding job or big commitments. She worked part-time in a boutique and spent most of her nights posting about vegan recipes and yoga sessions on social media. I kept wondering, how can someone be so selfish? She didn't even apologize. She was just curt and direct. It was clear that she didn't care about us. In the end, it was Mrs. Donahue who took the initiative. She couldn't do everything on her own, but she organized a group of neighbors who took turns helping out. They coordinated to take care of the children, bring meals, and run errands. Their kindness moved me to tears, but it also intensified my resentment towards Trina. Here were practically strangers making an extraordinary effort to support us, while a member of the family flatly refused to help. I tried to ask my mother-in-law to help when she could, as she lived closer, but she only came to the hospital once to see how her son was. The following weeks were some of the most difficult of my life. Between physical therapy sessions and trying to run the household from a hospital bed, I was completely exhausted. My husband was doing the best he could, but he was limited by his own injuries. Every time I thought of Trina, I felt a wave of anger building up inside me. She hadn't even called to ask how we were. It was as if we didn't exist to her. The rift she created wasn't just between her and me. It also affected my relationship with my husband. He didn't openly defend her, but his refusal to confront her made me feel unsupported. He would say things like, "She's always been like that," or "That's just Trina," as if that justified her behavior. I wanted him to be as outraged as I was, for him to confront her for her selfishness. But he remained neutral, caught between his wife and his sister. It became an unspoken rule in our house not to mention her name, but the resentment persisted like a shadow over everything. Months passed, and gradually life returned to normal. My husband and I recovered physically, but emotionally I was still deeply hurt. I focused on the children and tried to put my anger aside, although it wasn't easy. Every time I saw Trina's name on social media, showing off her latest vacation or some elaborate meal she had prepared, it rekindled my bitterness. Not only did she refuse to help, but she continued with her life without a care in the world while we struggled daily. What hurt me the most was not simply her refusal, but the principle behind it. Emergencies reveal who really cares about you, and Trina had made it painfully clear where we stood on her list of priorities. Family for her was an abstract concept, something in which she could participate or not as it suited her. I couldn't understand how someone could be so indifferent, so disconnected from the people who supposedly should matter most to them. By the time everything had calmed down, I had made a firm decision. I would not allow Trina back into our lives, at least not easily. She had shown me exactly who she was, and I was not going to give her a free pass. I didn't care if my husband thought I was overreacting or if the rest of the family thought I was being too harsh. Trina had drawn a clear line, and I had every intention of keeping her there. Little did I know that she would be the one to cross that line just a few months later, but not for the reasons I would have expected. It was a quiet morning when Trina's name appeared on my phone, and for a second I thought I was imagining it. It had been 8 months since the accident, and not once had she called or sent a message. I stared at her name on the screen, wondering whether to answer. Curiosity got the better of me, so I replied, preparing myself mentally for whatever excuse or superficial apology I might offer. She didn't even start with a greeting. She jumped straight in to tell me that she had some exciting news to share. Apparently, she had been seeing someone new, a man called Kevin who, according to her, placed a high value on family. She emphasized how much he valued close family relationships and how important it was for her to show him that she was, in her own words, a committed aunt. I was left perplexed, trying to process what I had just heard. She casually went on to ask if she could come and spend time with the children that afternoon, or if I could leave them with her. Her audacity hit me like a physical blow. 8 months of total silence, no apologies, no acknowledgement of the hell we had been through, and now she wanted to play the role of loving aunt. I was so stunned I couldn't even articulate a coherent response. When I finally found my voice, I asked her why she thought this was appropriate. She laughed, saying it was no big deal and that she just wanted to bond with the kids. I told her straight that she had made it very clear that she wasn't interested in being part of their lives when it really mattered. I reminded her of the countless times we begged her for help and how she had ignored us without the slightest consideration. Her tone changed, sounding defensive and annoyed. She said she didn't understand why she was still holding a grudge over something in the past. Everyone has limits, she argued, and it wasn't fair for us to expect her to abandon them just because we had an emergency. She claimed she wasn't against the family, but she needed to protect her lifestyle choices. I couldn't help but laugh, but it was a bitter, cold laugh. Protect her lifestyle choices? Was she serious? I explained that personal boundaries are one thing, but selfishness is something else entirely. Her refusal to help was not about protecting herself, but pure indifference. I told her it wasn't just her lack of action, but the principle behind it. Emergencies don't respect boundaries, and real families should be there when it really counts. Trina didn't like hearing this. She snapped back that I was being overly dramatic, that she didn't owe us anything at all. Her voice was sharp as she accused me of trying to make her feel guilty for making decisions that were best for her, but then she changed her approach, trying to soften her tone, saying that she really wanted to make up for the past and show Kevin what a good aunt she could be. That's when I completely exploded. I told her point blank that my children were not accessories for her to use and impress her new boyfriend. If she thought she could come back into their lives without taking responsibility for her actions, she was completely wrong. I made it clear to her that I was not interested in her impromptu attempts at reconciliation, especially when they were so obviously selfish. Her response was to call me petty and vindictive, accusing me of punishing her for something she could no longer change. She claimed that I was being unfair and selfish by denying the children the opportunity to have a relationship with their aunt. I replied that the relationship was not mine to deny, it was hers to ruin, and she had done an excellent job of that herself. When I finally hung up, my hands were shaking with anger. I went over the conversation in my mind, wondering if I had been too harsh. But then I remembered all the sleepless nights, the physical pain, the stress of those first months after the accident. And I knew that my reaction was completely justified. Trina had shown me who she really was, and I wasn't going to forget it. Am I wrong about this? Update 1. She wasn't done with the matter. 2 weeks later, she showed up at our door with Kevin by her side. I wasn't home at the time, but my husband opened the door and let them in, much to my dismay. When I returned, they were sitting in the living room, Trina enthusiastically talking about how she would love to take the kids out for ice cream or to the park and have them over more often. Kevin intervened, saying that he thought it was wonderful that Trina wanted to be a more active part of the family. I stood in the doorway watching them, barely containing my frustration. I turned to my husband, asking him why he hadn't told me they were coming. He shrugged, saying he didn't see the problem with letting them visit. I told Trina in front of everyone that her sudden interest in my children was not welcome. I made it clear that she was clearly not doing this out of love, but out of personal convenience. She had no right to show up uninvited and act as if everything was perfectly fine when she had done nothing to make up for her previous actions. Kevin tried to mediate by saying that family relationships could be complicated, but that it was worth trying to save them. I turned to him and asked him directly, "Do you even know what she did?" I told him about our accident and how Trina argued that her child-free lifestyle choices were more important at that critical moment. I asked him how he would feel if someone abandoned him at his most vulnerable moment and then came back acting as if nothing had happened. He seemed genuinely surprised and had no answer. Trina was visibly upset and accused me of being unreasonable, saying that I was exaggerating the situation. She insisted that I needed to let go of the past and focus on the future. That was the last straw. I told her that letting go was not the problem. Trust was. She had clearly demonstrated that she could not be trusted, and I was not going to allow her to hurt my children in the same way that she had hurt me and my husband emotionally. I explained that forgiveness requires effort and responsibility, neither of which she had shown so far. When she saw that she wasn't getting anywhere, she resorted to making me feel guilty, saying that I was being cruel by denying her the opportunity to be part of the children's lives. I replied that the real cruelty was what she did when she turned her back on us in our darkest hour. If she wanted forgiveness, she needed to earn it, and turning up unannounced with her family-friendly boyfriend was not the way to do it. Trina stormed out, dragging Kevin with her. My husband sat there with a conflicted expression. He said that she had been too harsh, and that maybe he should give her a chance to make amends. I made it clear to him that I wasn't against reconciliation, but it had to be genuine. Trina wasn't there to repair real relationships. She was only there to impress Kevin. I told him that I had had enough of his selfishness, and I wasn't going to allow him to manipulate his way back into our lives. Over the next few days, the atmosphere at home was tense. My husband didn't mention Trina again, but I could tell he was still upset by the situation. However, I stood my ground. If Trina really wanted a relationship with my children, she needed to start by showing that she cared about their well-being, not just her own image. Update 2. A few weeks passed without any news from Trina, and I deeply appreciated that period of calm. It gave me time to concentrate on my family and recover some peace of mind after her unexpected visit. But as expected, Trina was not the type of person to leave things unresolved. One night, I received a text message from her. It was strangely formal, almost rehearsed, as if she had written it several times before sending it. She said she had been thinking deeply and realized that maybe she hadn't handled things well in the past. She admitted that she had failed me during the accident and said she wanted to make amends. She even offered to look after the children one night if we needed a break. It was tempting to accept, but I couldn't ignore the suspicious timing of this change. Only a few weeks earlier, he had been completely defensive and indifferent, insisting that he had done nothing wrong. Now suddenly he was radically changing his stance. The skeptical part of me couldn't help but think that this was another ploy to regain our trust for Kevin's sake, not out of genuine concern for us. I showed the messages to my husband and asked his opinion. He shrugged and suggested that maybe I should accept her offer, if only to see if she was really interested in changing. He reminded me that holding on to resentment wouldn't do us any good, especially if she was genuinely trying to make things right. Her words stayed with me for days. I didn't want to be the kind of person who held on to grudges forever, but I also didn't want to be naive and vulnerable. Trina had shown her true colors more than once, and I wasn't convinced that a few well-crafted messages would be enough to erase all the damage caused. Even so, I decided to carefully test the waters. I replied, saying that if he really wanted to make peace, he would have to start by fully acknowledging the damage he had caused. I made it clear that I was not interested in empty gestures or superficial apologies. If he wanted to be part of our lives, he needed to prove that he could be trusted. I also made it clear that allowing my children to be in his care was not something I would consider for the time being. Her response came quickly, and it was clear that she hadn't expected me to react like this. She said that she thought her message had already acknowledged her mistakes sufficiently and that it wasn't fair for me to keep bringing up the past. She insisted that she was doing everything she could and accused me of intentionally making reconciliation difficult. I felt my patience was completely exhausted. It was like talking to a brick wall. No matter how I put it, she couldn't or wouldn't understand that it took more than just saying the right words. I told her so, adding that if she wasn't willing to make a genuine effort, there was no point in continuing the conversation. She didn't respond after that, and I assumed that would be the end of it. Update 3. I should have known it wouldn't end so easily. Trina has never been one to accept rejection, especially when she wants something badly. About a week later, my husband and I were in the park with the kids when Trina suddenly appeared. She was dressed to the nines, clearly trying to make a good impression. As expected, Kevin was following her, looking a little uncomfortable. She greeted us as if absolutely nothing had happened between us. Her voice was exaggeratedly cheerful and lively. She bent down to greet the children, who responded with obvious hesitation. They didn't know her well enough to be excited by her presence, something that seemed to surprise her. I stood with my arms crossed, waiting for her to bring up the subject we were all thinking about. Instead, she began to talk animatedly about how she and Kevin had just finished brunch and thought it would be nice to spend the afternoon with us. Kevin intervened, saying that he thought it was great that Trina was making an effort to reconnect with the family. I could feel my irritation growing internally, but I kept my tone neutral as I asked her why she hadn't called before showing up. She dismissed the question, saying she didn't think it was important and that my husband had mentioned to them where we would be. She added that she just wanted to spend time with the kids and thought we wouldn't mind having her around. I stared at my husband, who seemed torn between supporting me and avoiding a public confrontation. I decided to take control of the situation. I told Trina directly that turning up uninvited was not the right way to proceed. I made it clear that if she was really serious about reconciliation, she needed to respect our boundaries and stop trying to force her way back into our lives. Trina's cheerful facade visibly crumbled. She said she didn't understand why I was being so difficult with her. She claimed she was doing her best to make things right, but I was stubbornly rejecting her at every turn. Kevin intervened, saying he thought I should give Trina a chance to prove she had changed. That's when I completely lost it. I told Trina that actions speak much louder than words, and so far her actions had only shown me that she cared more about appearances than building authentic relationships. I pointed out how she had completely ignored us for months when we needed her the most, and now she was trying to play the role of loving aunt simply because it fit the image she wanted to project. I asked Kevin directly if this was the kind of woman he wanted as the future mother of his children. Trina's face turned bright red as she accused me of being bitter and heartless. She said I was holding her to an impossible standard. She even had the audacity to claim that my negativity was setting a bad example for the children. That was the final straw. I replied that my primary responsibility was to protect my children from people who couldn't be trusted, and at that moment that definitely included her. I told her that she had no right to lecture me about setting a good example when she had consistently shown that she valued her own comfort above the well-being of her family. Kevin seemed to want to disappear completely, but Trina wasn't finished with the confrontation. She accused me of deliberately trying to alienate her from the family and claimed that I was being unfair. I replied that any concept of fairness had disappeared the moment she turned her back on us when we needed her most. I made it clear that I wasn't going to apologize for not wanting someone like her in our family. By the time the heated argument ended, Trina was furious, and Kevin was awkwardly trying to reduce the tension in the atmosphere. My husband remained silent, which only increased my frustration with him. Trina left in a huff, dragging Kevin with her once again, but not before loudly declaring that she was definitely done trying to please me. I had made my position absolutely clear. Update 4. A few weeks had passed since Trina's last appearance, and I was beginning to think that maybe she had finally got the message, but as always, my optimism was completely misplaced. This time she decided to directly involve my parents and my in-laws in the conflict. Her mother called one night while we were cleaning up after dinner. I could clearly hear her voice, even though the phone wasn't on speaker. She was shrill and insistent. She asked my husband why I was so determined to cause unnecessary tension in the family. She claimed that Trina was doing everything humanly possible to fix things, and it wasn't fair that I continued to stubbornly reject her. My husband handled the call with more patience than I would have had in his place. He calmly explained that we had completely valid reasons to be upset and that Trina's actions were not exactly helping her case. Her mother did not accept these arguments. She insisted that family is family and that it was time to move on and forget the past. I took the phone from her hands and told my mother-in-law directly that I needed to stop justifying Trina's unacceptable behavior. I reminded her how she and her daughter had flatly refused to help when we were hospitalized, how she had ignored our desperate calls and left us completely alone. I asked her what her justification for that attitude was. I explained that true forgiveness does not mean pretending that everything is fine and perfect. It means recognizing the damage caused and making people take responsibility. I hung up immediately. My husband commented that his mother didn't understand why we couldn't just forgive Trina and allow her to spend more time with the children. She was still trying to maintain a neutral position, but I wasn't in the mood for useless diplomacy. He asked me if I could at least find a middle ground with Trina. He mentioned that his mother felt I was taking things too personally, but that she didn't want to make me angry. His tone was cautious, as if he were testing the waters to gauge my reaction. I didn't even give him a chance to finish his point. I asked him why he couldn't see something that was completely obvious. Why couldn't he stand up to his family for once instead of tiptoeing around their feelings? I told him that it was absolutely exhausting to be the only one fighting for what was right while he remained indecisive, pretending to mediate. He replied that I was being unfair to him. He claimed that he was only trying to keep the peace in the family and that the situation was not as simple as taking one side or the other. He said he understood my frustration, but that I should also consider the bigger picture. That's when I completely lost it. I told him he could keep his so-called diplomacy. I accused him that his constant need to be the peacemaker was allowing Trina and her mother to completely manipulate us, especially me and our innocent children. I told him that if he wanted to continue to please them, he could do it alone, because I was definitely done being nice to them. He sat up in his seat, his eyes narrowed. He asked me what exactly that was supposed to mean, and I didn't hold back at all. I made it clear that it meant that if he didn't start backing me up firmly, there would be serious consequences. I told him that I wasn't going to keep fighting this battle all alone while he tried to keep everyone superficially happy. I explained that it wasn't my responsibility to make his family feel comfortable at the expense of my mental health. He replied that family conflicts are never simply black and white and that I should stop making ultimatums. I laughed bitterly and told him to shut up once and for all. I was absolutely furious with him. I explained that this was not a black and white issue. If it were that simple, I would not have remained silent for so long. I reminded him that his sister had repeatedly disrespected us, had abandoned us at our most critical moment, and was now trying to manipulate us for her own benefit. I asked him how he could possibly see this situation as something that required neutrality. She tried to say something, but I interrupted her immediately. I told her that I was completely exhausted from being the villain in the eyes of his family while he played the role of the good and understanding guy. I confessed to her that I was fed up with his mother's guilt-tripping and Trina's false apologies. I complained to her that I was exhausted from fighting for our family while he passively watched from a safe distance. He looked down, saying that he was just trying to manage things in a way that didn't completely destroy the family dynamic. I replied that the family dynamic had already been destroyed from the moment his sister refused to help us without showing the slightest compassion. I explained that the fundamental problem was not her refusal per se. It was the cold and calculated way in which she refused. I told her that her family had made their own decisions, and now they had to face the natural consequences. I made it clear to her that I was tired of being the scapegoat, and if she couldn't stand firmly by my side, she was completely free to join them. I told her that I wasn't asking for anything extraordinary, just for her to show some basic loyalty towards her own wife and children. I asked him if he even realized how painful it was to feel like he was facing this fight all alone. His posture sank, and for a moment I thought that I had finally managed to make him understand, But then he said that he didn't think this conflict was worth completely destroying the family. I was absolutely frozen, full of disbelief. I asked him directly if he thought I was the one destroying the family. I questioned him if he really believed that this disaster was my responsibility. He hesitated notably in responding, which made me even more furious. I told him that his attitude was pathetic, that his obsessive need to maintain a superficial peace was going to cost him the only person who had really supported him unconditionally. I asked him bitterly if it had been his mother who had looked after him for months, helping him to recover physically. I told him clearly that if he wanted to side with his family of origin, that was his right, but that he shouldn't expect me to follow him blindly. I assured him that I had enough self-respect to stand up for myself firmly, even if he didn't have the courage to do so. He seemed genuinely surprised by my frankness. I asked him how he would feel if his sister had taken our children to the park, but instead of keeping a proper eye on them, she was distracted by kissing her boyfriend, and our children had an accident. I questioned him as to whether that would finally open his eyes to reality. He didn't reply. He just stood there completely stunned. I told him that I had definitely ended this discussion and had nothing more to add. I made it clear to him that if he really wanted to save what was left of our marriage, he needed to start showing me with actions that I and our children mattered more than the fragile egos of his family of origin. Then I left the kitchen because I urgently needed fresh air and space to think clearly. I sat down in the living room, and a few minutes later he came and sat down next to me. His attitude seemed less obstinate than before. He admitted honestly that I was right in my observations. He recognized that he had been hiding behind his supposed diplomatic neutrality, using it as a shield to avoid any uncomfortable confrontation. He confessed that it was easier for him to allow me to play the role of villain because that exempted him from having to confront his family directly. Hearing him admit this truth was comforting, but it also hurt me more deeply than I had anticipated. I asked him why he considered that behavior to be acceptable and why he thought it was fair to leave me completely alone, bearing the full weight of the family's judgment. He replied that it was obviously not right and that this was precisely the part of the whole situation that he regretted the most. He admitted that he had unconsciously taken advantage of my natural protective instinct, knowing that I would always step up when the going got tough. He acknowledged that it had been deeply selfish of him to allow me to bear all the blame while he tried to keep everyone artificially happy. His voice broke slightly as he went on to explain that he now understood how much emotional pressure he had placed on my shoulders. He said that he finally saw how extremely lonely it must have felt for me to fight these battles without support, especially when I should have been able to count on him unconditionally. He admitted with embarrassment that he had not been a good partner during this process, and that he despised himself for it. I sat looking at him, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to forgive him immediately, but a more cautious part of me wasn't quite ready. I asked him why it had taken him so long to reach this obvious conclusion. Why couldn't he have had this important revelation before the situation deteriorated so much? He replied honestly that he had no adequate justification for that. He simply acknowledged that he had been too caught up in his own fears of generating conflict. He confessed that he had concentrated so much on maintaining a superficial illusion of harmony that he did not realize that he was sacrificing something much more valuable, our mutual trust and our true marital partnership. His words hit me hard, and for a moment I had to look away to process my emotions. I explained that his family's behavior was one thing, but his lack of support was something completely different and much more painful. I told him that I could handle the external judgments, the emotional manipulations, and the attempts to make me feel guilty, but I couldn't bear the feeling of being completely alone in this struggle. Then he extended his hand and placed it gently on mine in a conciliatory gesture. He said that he now finally understood the situation and sincerely promised to improve his attitude. He assured me that he would stand firmly by my side from that moment on, even if it meant making his family of origin uncomfortable. He said that he was finished hiding behind excuses and allowing me to bear the full emotional weight of the situation. I could see genuine sincerity in his eyes. I replied that actions would speak louder than words, and he nodded, understanding that I would need to prove it with concrete facts. The tension between us gradually began to dissipate. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a positive starting point. A few days later, Trina tried a new strategy. She formally invited us all to a family dinner at her parents' house. The invitation came with an overly enthusiastic message. I almost laughed when I read it because it was so transparently false. I didn't even bother to reply directly. My husband said that he had already politely declined the invitation and that it wasn't worth giving the matter any more thought. The children, fortunately, were too young to fully comprehend the complexity of the family drama. Since many of you have specifically asked for an update on Trina's relationship, here is the latest information, approximately 1 month after the latest events. Kevin finally ended his relationship with her. It seems that he eventually managed to see through her elaborate facade. And to clarify frequent questions, no, he was not particularly wealthy, but from what we could tell, he enjoyed a fairly comfortable and stable lifestyle.